Growing up, two of my favorite things were horror movies and video games. In fact, that pretty much sums up every single weekend of my childhood. Every single weekend I would go to the local rental shop, I would get a Nintendo Entertainment System game, and a horror movie on VHS. Of all the great, and not so great, horror movie series, Friday the 13th was probably my favorite. I just loved the music, the atmosphere, and especially the cinematography. Okay, who am I kidding? I love the gore and naked ladies. What kid didn't? So when I found out they made a Friday the 13th game for the Nintendo Entertainment System, I couldn't wait to play it. Needless to say, as a kid, I actually kind of hated it. I know, right? Friday the 13th on the Nintendo Entertainment System. How is it not awesome? I felt this way for a very long time, but the game kept drawing me back, and the more I played it, the more I grew to appreciate it for what it is. Today, it may just be one of my favorite games on the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Remember all those great games we used to play growing up in the 80s and 90s? Most of them are sitting in an attic or garage somewhere doing nothing but gathering dust. My opinion is, we should give them another look.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to recover here from the overall collective groan I heard when I said Friday the 13th on the Nintendo Entertainment System was in fact a good game. Yeah, I know what you're saying. The Angry Video Game Nerd reviewed it, so obviously it's terrible. Mike Matei said it was one of the worst games he had ever played when they replayed it on James and Mike Mondays. It's abundantly clear that neither Mike or James have ever really understood how to play it, and honestly, I felt the exact same way when I started playing. The game isn't very clear on how to play, and immediately there are some issues that would easily turn you off from it.
The good folks at LJN did everything they could to make enjoying this game a chore. Well, to be fair, it was actually developed by Atlas. Yes, the same company everybody fawns over all the time, but the label says LJN, so let's just focus on that. First up and out of the gate is the fact that you default start as the Counselor George. Well, why is that a big deal? The problem is that George is by far one of the slowest and most useless characters in the game. You see, the counselors all have different attributes, which of course isn't clear. Unless you read the strategy section of the manual, and honestly, what kid actually read the manual? Unless you want to make the game incredibly difficult, you do not play as George because he moves so slow that it's impossible to make any progress in the game, jump over enemies, or actually reach one of the cabins that Jason is attacking. The next issue with the game is what we just talked about, the Jason alarm. Jason will randomly, or so it seems, attack children or the other counselors in one of the cabins scattered across the map of Crystal Lake. You have a limited amount of time in which to get to the cabin, and if you are using a slow character, you almost have no chance of getting there. On top of that, even if you did, it's so hard to tell which way you are going on the map. You go left, but on the map it shows you going right. Up is down, left is right. I'm at the nexus of the universe. You have to consistently reference your map, or otherwise you are totally lost. Speaking of lost, what the heck do I even do in this game? The only in-game direction you are given is to light the fireplaces. Okay, so, like, all of them? It doesn't even tell you that first you might need something to light them with. On the trail, after you have defeated an enemy and you jump up, you receive a lighter, which you will need to do this. The lighter is also necessary for you to get all the other weapons, but we will come back to that. After you have the lighter, you go to the large cabins in the game and light all the fireplaces, and guess what? No, you didn't beat the game. No, not even close. It just gives you a weapon, the torch. Which is also the game's WMD, by the way. But that is it, and as you will learn later, a very unnecessary process. So, what do I do now? You just wander around lost until Jason kills everyone. Jason is the big bad of the game, of course, but there are other enemies that constantly wander around and impede your progress. I can justify most of them as they are predatory animals you could possibly encounter in the woods, but the zombies are the most frequent enemy. Zombies? How does that make any sense? I didn't know I was playing Return of the Living Dead on the NES. The enemies for the most part can be avoided, but in order to get new weapons you have to take them out. You do so by attacking with your default weapon, the rock. No, not that one, but an actual rock. The problem with the rock is that it cannot be thrown straight. It has a strange arc, which is somewhat realistic, actually, so stop complaining. Unfortunately, the arc makes it difficult to actually make contact with the oncoming enemies, unless you know the secret of crouching and shooting. All of the enemies can be dispatched fairly easily, that is, all except Jason. You face Jason in either a top-down battle in one of the cabins or on the trail. In both instances, Jason will just keep on attacking until you have hit him 5 or 6 times with the weapon you currently have. On the trail, it is easy to avoid his attacks, but in the cabin, he comes right at you, and damage appears unavoidable. That is, unless you know that there is a dodge technique like in Punch-Out. Even after learning the dodge, unless you have a powerful weapon like the torch, your attacks will do little to no damage on him, and his life bar seems insurmountable. So taking all this into consideration, most new players to this game will start as Slow George with only a weird arcing rock to attack with in a game with zero to no direction on how to advance. If that's not bad enough, you are immediately hit with a Jason alarm that gives you no time before you come face to face with the game's final boss. That is, if you can even find your way to him on the Bizarro Land map, and if you do manage to find your way to him, it seems like it is impossible to damage him or avoid his attacks, and you will die almost immediately. See? Doesn't that just sound like immeasurable fun?
It's so easy to see why most people dislike this game immediately. LJN made it very hard to enjoy this one. However, if you can see past all those issues and learn how the game actually works, it has a lot to offer, like the great inclusion of elements from the film series.
I have already mentioned that I am a huge fan of the Friday the 13th movies, and specifically my favorites are the earlier ones, where Jason was still a human and the story was more grounded in reality. I will admit though, Jason Lives holds a special place in my heart, even though that was the start of Zombie Jason. There is no story for Friday the 13th on the NES specifically, so it doesn't follow a specific film, but yet has elements of many of the films. Take for example, Jason's mother's head shows up in the game as a sub-boss in the caverns. Once you defeat her, you are given her sweater, which will double the amount of damage you can take. This comes directly from Friday the 13th Part 2, where Jason's mother's head is on a shrine, complete with her sweater in Jason's shack in the woods. Ginny, the heroine of Part 2, uses Jason's mother's sweater to distract Jason, leading to his downfall. Next up are the weapons in the game, which have all been used at one point or another in the series by Jason. In some instances, the weapons were directly used to spell defeat for the masked maniac, like the machete which killed him in Parts 2 and 4, and the axe that was lodged into his head in Part 3. Speaking of Jason dying, in the game you have to defeat Jason 3 times, which is just like in the movie series. It was only after he was felled for the 3rd time in the final chapter that he actually died. There is also Jason's movements, which are clearly an homage to Crispin Glover's amazing dance in Friday the 13th Part 4. Okay, I'm being speculative on the death count and absurd on the last point, but if I had to specifically pick a movie that matches closest to the game, it would be Jason Lives. Why? Well, just for the simple fact that there are actually kids at camp, and Jason Lives was the only movie that featured Jason attacking while the children were in peril.
Okay, so the game gave some great nods to the film franchise it was based off, but that doesn't make it a good or interesting game, especially if you aren't even a fan of the films. But maybe you're a fan of survival horror. Yeah, think about it. Friday the 13th is a survival horror game and introduced many of the elements that are a staple of the genre today. Once you take that into consideration and overlook the horrible way that you're thrown into it, you can start to learn how to play the game and actually enjoy it.
The name of the game is Survival in Friday the 13th, and this concept, much like the direction in the game, wasn't clear to gamers back in the late 1980s, as we hadn't seen a game like this before. Back in that time, it was all about getting from start to finish in platformers, so when a game came around that broke that mold, of course it was met with resentment. But much like the genre we are familiar with today, the game is all about performing a series of actions to get an item that will progress your character further along in the game. The item we are talking about here is the torch, which damages Jason by a full point on each attack and is essential to taking him down, which can be found one of two ways. First is the way we are directed to find it by lighting all the fireplaces in the big cabins. This is extremely time consuming, and if your character dies in the middle of doing so, the fireplaces do not remain lit for the other counselors. Also, if you are having trouble understanding the map, it's impossible to tell what fireplaces are already lit and what ones are not. You'll want to go with the easy way on this one, which is to head into the big cabin on the lake nearest to the upper woods and find a note that says, "Go into the woods." Once you have a key, head to the woods and head right. Go up twice and you will find the hidden cabin. Once in the hidden cabin, you will find a second note that says, "Fire will damage Jason the most." Head back to the cabin where you got the first note to grab your torch, and it's time to light Jason up. Whatever you do, hang on to that torch like grim death, because you will have to repeat the whole process in order to get it back. You can do this with multiple characters, but I tend to stick with Mark and Chrissy, as they are the fastest of the bunch. The other counselors I like to strategically place around the map, specifically around the lake, to act as cannon fodder for Jason. Just kidding, but they are extremely useful for getting to the lake to rescue the children while leaving your more agile counselors high and dry. It's pretty easy to switch between counselors. Just enter a small cabin and hit start and select between the counselors, which makes it very easy to answer the Jason alarm in time. Once you have the torch on day 1, track down Jason either in one of the cabins or on the trail. This is where another key element of survival horror comes into play, the jump scare. Just like in Friday the 13th Part 2, where that freaking cat jumps in through the window, Jason appears out of nowhere.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. You gotta be kidding me. Oh. Oh. Oh.
Come on, you can't tell me you don't freak out a little when Jason pops up out of nowhere. I prefer to battle Jason in the cabins on day 1, as he is extremely easy to dodge and attack there without losing much energy. If you do run out of energy, there are vitamins that will automatically restore a portion of your life when you die, or can be used by another counselor to heal you. After a few encounters with Jason and you using the mighty torch, he will be defeated, but with a warning that he's even stronger now. And Jason does get stronger actually, as he becomes tougher to fight in the cabins as his speed changes from fast to slow, and it becomes extremely difficult to dodge his attacks. That's why on day 2 it is essential to get some added protection. So we head to the caves with either Mark or Chrissy. If you turn left at the entrance on the second platform, there is a section of rock that seems disturbed. Press up here to enter a secret chamber. It isn't supposed to be so cryptic, as the correct way to do it is to acquire a flashlight that will reveal the door, but I have just never bothered to find it. Once in the hidden chamber, you will encounter the decapitated head of Pamela Voorhees, who for some reason starts floating around and spitting stuff at you, just like in the movies. Once you defeat her, you will obtain her sweater, and that will reduce damage by half, making it much easier to face Jason. I prefer to fight Jason on day 2 on the trail, but he isn't easy to find. He is still beatable in the cabins, but you have to get lucky and hope that it's a time where he will not speed up to the insane amount where his attacks are almost unblockable. Once you defeat Jason a second time, a scene of Jason defeated on the ground is shown with a warning that he still isn't defeated, and he is even stronger. What this means to me now is that it's impossible to beat Jason in the cabins, as his attack pattern no longer alternates and he is constantly in fast attack mode. The key to day 3 is managing to find Jason on the trail. Once you do, just keep attacking him and hope that you outduel him. If you still have the torch, have Pamela Voorhees' sweater, and have a supply of vitamins remaining, this should be no problem and you can finally put down Jason for good.
I admit, I was a skeptic, and I thought just like everyone else that this game was terrible, but being a big fan of the film franchise, I was determined to learn how to play it and finally beat it. And honestly, I'm glad I did, because not only did I get a 20-year monkey off my back, I also found a game that was maybe a little before its time, and definitely misunderstood. It's easily one of the most unique experiences on the system, and I bet if you ignore what you've been previously told to think of it and honestly give it a shot, you'll find something special too.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I peed a little.